Daily protests in Sudan, unrest that's gathering momentum, and more demands for the president to quit. But Omar al Bashir has ruled for 30 years and remains defiant. So can the protesters succeed, and will international pressure make a difference? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Richelle, Carey. They are the longest in decades and the most significant in Sudan's recent history. Nationwide protests have been taking place almost every day for a month. They were prompted by a rise in bread and fuel prices, but the demonstrators quickly turned their attention to other issues and called to overthrow the president. Omar al Bashir's response has been a crackdown by security forces. Dozens of people have been killed and hundreds arrested in recent weeks. Waal has the latest from Khartoum.
It's been over a month now since these protests started here in Sudan. At the beginning, they were a way to show popular anger against rising prices, inflation, and scarcity of some commodities. But then they soon developed into demands for the government of Omar al Bashir to step down. And this is the longest wave of protests against the Sudanese government since the independence of this country. Dozens of people have been killed. The government statistics talk about 24 people killed. Activists talk about 50 people killed during these protests. And there is claim and counterclaim as to who killed these protesters. Just a while ago today, President Omar al Bashir gave a speech in the state of White Nile, south of Khartoum, and he said that these protesters have not been killed by any state apparatus. He accused protesters of having an element infiltrated within them who shoot at other protesters in order to blame the government. That's a serious accusation according to some observers here. And this discussion about who kills the protesters has been going on for some time now.
So here's how we got to this situation. The protests began against rising prices, but widened to question President Omar al Bashir's rule. They began in Atbara, but quickly spread to other cities, including the capital, Khartoum. The government declared a state of emergency and curfews in some towns and has also restricted internet access. Police used tear gas, batons, and reportedly live bullets to disperse the crowds. Bashir called the protesters traitors and said they were being influenced by foreign powers who want to destabilize the country. His economic policies have been denounced by protesters who accuse the government of corruption. Let's bring in our guest now here in Doha, Abdel-wahab Affendi, professor of politics at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies, and in Boston via Skype is Alex Duvall, research professor and executive director of the World Peace Foundation at Tufts University's Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. And thank you both for joining me. Abdel-wahab, I'm going to start with you. There have been protests, obviously, in Sudan before. Does it feel or seem different this time?
Yes, it's quite different, actually. To start with, this has been going on for more than a month. In the past, any protests had brought the government down within a week or maximum 11 days. So the continuation is interesting in the sense it's also widespread, started from outside Khartoum, still going on in Khartoum and outside Khartoum. It looks in some ways like the last days of the 1985 protests, in that they were spread in various areas of the capital, not just the center. So the popular feeling seems to be very strong, and the polarization in the country is also much higher.
Alex, what's your characterization of the protests this time compared to other times in Sudan?
Well, I completely agree with Abdel-wahab Affendi that there is an extraordinarily strong societal consensus that it's time for change, and the current government, and which is increasingly a really minority clique, has to go. However, I think there's one thing that really is very different today from in the past, which is In the past, in the previous popular uprisings, 1964 and 1985, the army was a cohesive institution with some independence and autonomy, and the high command of the army could take the decision to stand with the people against the regime. Today, the army is fragmented. President Bashir has a sort of intimate knowledge of the officer corps, which has very much been shaped by him in his own image. And we also have the National Intelligence and Security Services as a rival power, which has a comparable level of capacity and firepower. And so the senior officers will be as suspicious of one another as they are fearful of the government or potentially embracing change. And I think, therefore, it's much more difficult for the security establishment to switch sides. And for that reason, I think President Bashir still has some cards to play.
Okay. The median age for someone in Sudan, the median age there is 19. Yes, that's 19. So a lot of the people that are protesting, this is all they have ever known. Abdel-wahab, why has this been the tipping point for them?
Yes, I think to start with, I want to disagree with Alex a little bit.
We like debate. Go right ahead.
Hi, Alex. I think that the army is still cohesive. I mean, whatever has happened, the army, there is a core army, there is a culture of the army. I think their fear is double fear. First of all, they are afraid from that there are many militias and security forces, and they don't want to jump in and create a civil war. So they are studying their moves carefully. Secondly, there is a worry among the military corps that if they make a coup and take over power, and Sudan is in the same situation as it is now, economically challenged and isolated, they will be in the same position as the current government. They wouldn't be able to feed the people. They wouldn't be able to do much. So they would like some support from outside on this. But if you go to your question, yes, it is the youth movement, and interestingly, there's quite a large number among the people arrested are themselves the children of people who are in the regime, including in the army and the party. So there is a feeling that this government has lost touch with the people. I think this is very clear. President Bashir was speaking today, although he was speaking in a rally in the White Nile province. He was nobody has his speech doesn't resonate with anyone. He's speaking about the people who are killing the demonstrators not having a relation with the government or the military or the police, but he is not saying that who is then firing. I mean, the government itself the security forces have been even entering houses and homes of people, arresting people from inside their homes. Mm-hmm. Just this morning, they have fire tear gas inside a college. So there is a problem. Does the government want to talk to the people, or does it want to fire bullets at the people? They are not making up their mind.
Actually, let me put that question to Alex. Alex, has there been any type of inkling at all from the president that he actually is concerned about what the people are upset about, or does it seem that his sole focus is keeping power?
I don't think I completely agree with Abdel-wahab on this. There's really not the slightest inkling of any sensitivity to the major concerns of the population. A few minor concessions or hints of concessions in terms of economic policy and subsidies and so on. But people in Sudan are completely fed up of this government. And it's clear that for the great majority of the population, this is the only government they've known, and so it's the same faces in government at the top of government over the last 30 years. It's only people who are 50 years and older who have ever had the chance to vote in a free and fair election in Sudan. The last such election was 1986. And so the kinds of change that people are demanding are change that are completely off the radar for this rather small, increasingly isolated ruling clique that is completely insensitive to the demands of the people. But I'd like to pick up, if I may, on one point that Abdel-wahab made, which is the international silence over this, because there has really not been any serious signal from the regional bodies, that's the African Union, the Arab League, the Gulf Coordination Council, or from the major powers in Europe and above all the United States. Everyone has been pretty much silent about what they would like to see in Sudan.
Alex,
and I think
if I could just real quick, because you're bringing up a point that I just want to add to what you're saying, and I want you to finish your thoughts. But Nicholas Kristof wrote in the New York Times, he says that the United States has joined statements with Britain, Norway, and Canada calling on Bashir to release detainees and recognize the right of peaceful assembly. But there should be a much sterner warning to all security forces that they will be held personally accountable for atrocities. It does, to your point, it does seem that there has not been a lot of attention from the international community. Why?
I think that the main reason for that is attention is elsewhere for very obvious reasons, and also there's a fear of what might happen next. There's a fear that there could be something worse than Bashir. And let us take, for example, what is happening in South Sudan, where we have a very fragile peace agreement. And the architect of that peace agreement is Omar al Bashir himself. He has actually been the one that has helped construct this very intricate arrangement, this share out of power and reward among the South Sudanese factions. And for many in the international community, they would rather have the devil they know with all the shortcomings than the devil they don't know, fearing what has happened with the overthrow of authoritarian regimes following the Arab Spring in Libya and in Yemen and so on.
Oh, okay. So yeah, you did touch on something that Abdel-wahab, I'd like to get your thoughts on. Alex is talking about how Omar al Bashir has manipulated a lot of what happens in South Sudan. He has been accused of basically exploiting ethnic and racial differences between people. How has that contributed to the state of things now?
Yes, I think just before that, about the international position, there is an interesting convergence of stances in the region. For example, the coalition, the Saudi Emirati coalition, which is fighting the war in Yemen, is supportive of al-Bashir for two different reasons. First, he sent an army to help them in Yemen. And secondly, I think together with Egypt, they are very worried about any revolution succeeding again. I think the whole strategy now of the Gulf states, especially the anti-Qatar coalition, is that they don't want any democratic uprising anymore, because that they feel that if they succeed, that will be a threat to their own stability. So they don't want any democratic uprising to succeed, and so they are supporting al-Bashir. But even the other side, they seem to see al-Bashir as more favorable to them than the others. And about the racial differences, yes, the government has actually tried from the very beginning, and they did that in the 2013 uprising, which was suppressed quickly, by trying to suggest that this is not a genuine popular uprising, but maybe from the people, especially from Darfur. So they arrested some group of Darfurian students and I think tortured them into admitting that they were militarized followers of Abdel-wahab Noor in Darfur, and they were planning to do some assassinations and things like that. However, this backfired very badly on them. Actually, one of the slogans now is to say that we are all Darfurians. One of the slogans is saying that you racist, we are all from Darfur. So it actually did the opposite of what they were hoping, to create fear of other people or divide the people. So I think the government at this moment are in very bad shape, because the momentum of the uprising seems to have picked up and seems to be very inclusive.
Okay.
Young people, old people, people from all variety, and as I said later, many of the children of the rulers themselves.
Alex, I mean, obviously, when South Sudan, left and was created, that was a chunk of oil revenue, obviously, right? But what has there ever been a plan for the economy of Sudan? How did this inflation? How did it get this bad? Is it incompetence or is it corruption?
It's corruption. I mean, in a word, the system that has developed over the last 30 years is a system founded on kleptocracy. And what has happened is that in order to stay in power, President Bashir and the clique around him have used the resources of the nation, not just to enrich themselves, but to set up a nationwide system of clientage. They are paying off people. And what that means is that when there is some sort of economic boom now, there is the lifting of some US sanctions, there is the peace agreement with South Sudan that means that some additional revenues will come because of more oil flowing. When there is a deal with the Saudis for payment for those troops that are dispatched to Saudi Arabia and to Yemen to fight on behalf of the Saudis, the majority of the economic benefits of that upturn goes into the pockets of the ruling elites, and the ordinary people simply don't see it. And the only strategy that President Bashir and his cabal have for maintaining power is using that patronage, using that money. And people are, I think, very, very well aware of this. And they're well aware of the type of change that needs to follow. And I think one of the remarkable and exemplary things about this uprising, which has now gone on for more than a month, is that it is non-violent. The only way in which authoritarians, which dictators have been overthrown in Sudan and elsewhere in the Arab world, has been through this kind of uprising. They are not overthrown through insurgency, through civil war. They are overthrown through civil uprising. And this seems to be the fundamental lesson that the demonstrators have learned and internalized. And it's something that the Sudanese government is unable to cope with, because the more they escalate the violence, the more they will be discredited and isolated. And the regime really is backed into a corner where the only option really for President Bashir is to negotiate some form of graceful exit for himself. He has really no other option before him.
Abdel-wahab, do you see that as actually a possibility? Let me put this to you a couple ways. Do you think that the protests will continue? And do you agree with Alex that at some point the protesters might actually get their way and the president may have to leave?
Yes, I think the problem is now that the more these protests escalate, the more the government, as Alex rightly pointed out, will have to engage into mass atrocities against the people. And if that happens, I think they will, the international community might be forced to react. So at the moment, they have managed to keep the casualties manageable. I mean, in September 2013, they killed 200 people in about 3-4 days in a small area of Khartoum. Now, up to now, I think after 1 month, they have only, the casualties are about 40. So they are playing the game of not antagonizing the international community at the moment and managing to disperse the demonstrations, because they are usually small demonstrations spread around the area. But it's clear that the feeling in the country as a whole is completely irreversible in the sense that they don't want any compromise with the government if it stays as it is. So
Do you think the president thinks that he can just wait this out?
Oh, yes, I think there some of the people, from what I know in the government and the security, are saying that yeah, they can manage this, and actually they say this might be good to mobilize their supporters who have been a little bit lethargic of late, and if they want to create a polarization, but I think they are mistaken in this. At the moment, there seems to be a wide public opinion, including within their own, I think, ranks. And at some point, the economy also gets worse because now there's stoppages a lot, and the streets are also, the businesses are not working, universities are closed. So this situation is unsustainable for the long term. Of course, he has been to Syria recently, and so he might have some tips from there about how to destroy your country.
All right, Abdel-wahab. Alex, if not Omar al Bashir, then who?
There is no clear leader emerging head and shoulders above the others. But what is quite striking, I think, is that a number of those who have been prominent in the Islamist movement, most notably former presidential advisor, leading Islamist Ghazi Salahuddin, are now aligned with the opposition. And so I think what there is the possibility of a very broad coalition, a government of national unity that actually brings into government not only those who are in the veteran opposition, who have opposed Bashir for all these years, but many of his former allies as well, and then bringing in, most importantly, a wide array of young people who are on the streets. It's time for a real generational change in the leadership of Sudan.
Would that happen without the international pressure and involvement we were talking about?
I think it would require some form of international mediated engagement. And one of the reasons for that, of course, is that President Bashir is reluctant to step down without some guarantees that he himself will not be handed over to the International Criminal Court to face prosecution. And also some of those who are very close to him similarly will face that risk. And this is perhaps the one concession that the opposition really ought to be contemplating making, because President Bashir and some of his close followers really are in a corner on that issue, which and compromise on that may be the price that they will have to consider to concede in order to have a non-violent transition to a future inclusive and democratic order.
Okay, well, I guess we will have to see how the rest of these protests play out. The final word then, I guess, will be for you, Abdel-wahab. Do you think that if we check back in a couple of weeks, things will be different?
I hope so, and I think pointing to the international community's role, I think it's better for international community, and especially the African Union, to move in and before it becomes too late, because at the moment there's a window of opportunity where there is a stalemate between the government and the opposition, and so some international actor might jump in and say, let's look at this. Let's look at this way. Let us have a transitional government. Let us have an easing out of Bashir with some guarantees and some change, which will then prevent the worst, which is massacres. I think the international community usually waits until it's too late, until the disaster has struck, and then they come in. It's usually more costly and also less effective. If you move in proactively, you could get somewhere.
You said a window for opportunity. We will have to see. Gentlemen, thank you very much for the conversation. I appreciate it. Abdel-wahab, Affendi, and Alex Duval, thank you very much. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime if you visit our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Richelle, Carey, and the entire team. Bye for now.